let's get to the meat of this conversation. Is technology in business a disruptor or is it an enabler? Pragashni.
So I'd have to say that everyone here knows that BC, before COVID, we took life for granted.
Yes.
And during COVID, overnight, we went digital. Everything from schools to universities to your Pilates classes. People became self-proclaimed master chefs overnight, baked a lot of banana bread. I do believe that in terms of being an enabler, what we did get to see was that we became dependent and had a lifeline through digital, just purely through using, for instance, ordering of your medication online, food, yes. Basics. Things that originally were known for frivolous activities. When you were bored, you went online, you shopped, you bought shoes, you had things delivered. But your life was actually enabled in so many ways because your touch point to the outside world was actually through digital means. You were using Teams, Zoom, and you were actually connecting with other people. But you also realized that the people that connected you to the outside were, people like delivery people, sanitation workers, and then you got to appreciate life on a different level. And I think all of us had to take stock of an appreciation of, despite stringent COVID protocols and the lockdown rules that were in place, life went on.
Yeah.
And I think that was actually a true movement towards catalyzing the way that we see technology and digital going forward. Because, the fourth industrial revolution was something that was meant to gently unravel. But what happened was, it suddenly happened. It had a jarring impact, but it made us look at technology in a completely different light. So I do definitely see it as being an enabler. We do obviously have moments where it is a disruptor, but in a way that's going to move you in a direction that's going to shape and mold the future.
Fantastic. And it's interesting you say that. It's kind of difficult to believe that it's going to be nearly 3 years at this that we've been in this kind of mode that we're in today. And I shudder to think what would have happened if this pandemic had hit us 10 years ago, right?
Sure.
Where the cloud wasn't the mature state that it was today. And I guess many of the things you're talking about wouldn't have been possible 10 years ago. But from your point of view, Nomonde, how do you see technology in business? Is it a disruptor or is it an enabler?
I would say it's both. And the reason why I'd say that is in the world of technology, we're always looking to do things faster, easier.
Yes.
And you mentioned cloud just now. So I suppose from a data center point of view, we're all looking to shrink, the space that we occupy in data centers and migrate to the cloud. But I guess in financial services, it will always be like a hybrid model because you can't completely be in the cloud rather. But the challenges that brings, right, is that the complexity of choice creates vulnerabilities and expands the level of inequality that then exists. Right. So you move from like one low point of maturity as it relates to the disparities that technology can also make violently apparent to all of us. And I think all of us saw it. And you spoke about lockdown. When we were all locked down, the 1% in this country was able to proceed and pivot. Your kids were, I'm sure everyone who's sitting in GIBS here today, your kids probably go to private school, which is not a bad thing. I'm not throwing shade. I'm part of that group. But in that, I think what it forced a lot of us to do is to recognize our privilege in that moment, because our kids had access to tools where they can continue learning online. But the majority of South Africans, I think it's important to bring this into the room, like we are living in a country that is the most unequal society in the entire world. And that made violently clear just how many people were left out as a result of that. And bringing it back to what we're going to talk about here today, which is your small to medium-sized enterprises, a lot of them were not able to pivot. So we speak about how we were able to pivot to hybrid working. That requires investment. It requires money. It wasn't you can just call an MNO like a Vodacom or an MTN to say, listen, all my staff must now move to working from home. It wasn't that simple for someone who, from a government point of view, your invoices don't get paid on time if you're an entrepreneur. So you are literally living hand to mouth. And as someone who's married to an entrepreneur, it's not that simple. You must pay your staff first before you actually pay yourselves. And these are things we don't, always consider when we sit in our comfortable office spaces and you make these calls and decisions around pivoting. Because even from a financial services point of view, I guess the decisions that were made in order to, and kudos to financial services, to try and buffer individuals who would not able to make payments at a point in time. But even that buffering was prejudicial because you looked at people who had a good payment history, not necessarily individuals who were struggling to necessarily pay their bills. So that disparity in a system which already does not, we say we want to foster entrepreneurship, but do we really want to foster entrepreneurship? Because it's very difficult if you're starting out and you don't have a baseline to get funding in this country. From banks also. So never mind, the government entities, because I'd like us to call ourselves to account, because more often than not, we don't have these conversations because they're not comfortable conversations to have. But startup capital is not easy in this country. And I'm speaking as a South African, so maybe it's easier somewhere else with regards to angel funding. But I'm saying it's an enabler and a disruptor both at the same time. Because for the people who were hard hit by COVID, those of us who were in tier 1 organizations who had access to capital were able to pivot, were able to digitize and fast track on your book of work the initiatives that were going to help your business grow revenue, even though you didn't have people physically in the office. There's a lot of businesses which have shut down because they could not leverage the very same technology, which became increasingly expensive. Because if we look at the share price of MNOs and how well they have done in a season where everybody else was bleeding, it tells a story. But I don't believe as technologists, it's a story that we must be proud of, because we also need to look at how we actually should be making sure that access to technology is not restricted to like a set few of people, but that people who ordinarily would not have access, how do we sit collectively and say, how do we actually solve for this problem? Because we know we need to build entrepreneurs in this country. We must. I mean, our dear president once told us it's not his responsibility to create jobs.
Yeah.
I mean, that's debatable. He did come back and apologize. But the point is, he's not entirely wrong, because we've got a collective responsibility to ensure that we actually trigger that industry and make sure that people win, because entrepreneurs create employment in a system where we're stagnated and we're not seeing growth necessarily. We should actually play our part as technologists around how do we help to make sure that we close the gap. We can't sit on the sidelines and pretend that we are not creating disparities in the market. So we need to actually get to a point of making sure that technology is more accessible. So it's definitely an enabler and a disruptor at the same time.
The way in which you implement technology can be either a disruptor or an enabler, right? And so let's just take some examples, right? Teams or Zoom or, just online meetings has shrunk the world to the point where I could have a discussion with a VC in the US or our client in Saudi Arabia and at almost zero cost to us, right?
Right.
So I think that's a good example of how, technology and the adoption of technology becomes an enabler, right? Equally so, it's a disruptor, right? So if you take the tourism sector as an example, right? I mean, the impact that South African tourism faced in light of COVID lockdowns, nobody traveling, completely decimated, right? But if I look at it today, and maybe it's probably 2 years too late, right? Westro's just launched Cape Town in the metaverse, okay? Now, for me, that's how you can change something which is completely disruptive into an enabler, right? We can expose kids from the DRC or from South America or from the US for that matter to the wonders of Table Mountain and Robben Island by putting some virtual reality goggles on there, right? And I think that's why I say that technology can be both an enabler and a disruptor. Your ability to capitalize on those advantages that makes you, unique and different, right? And so I always say to people that come like we employ people from the townships, unemployed youth from the townships, and exposing them to some of the greatest technology in the world. And I say to them, your biggest disadvantage is that you're a hustler. You come from the townships, you understand what it's like to live a hard life. How do you turn that disadvantage to your biggest advantage? And I think for small and medium-sized businesses, they need to adopt that frame of mind that says, actually, I don't have deep pockets. I don't have working capital lying around. I got to hustle my way through, develop something, and take it global.
Technology enables disruption. And so when we think about it from a big business perspective, we think about it from a medium business and then large businesses. I think large businesses predominantly look at it as how can it enable me to improve efficiency, productivity, those nice big things. But for the small and medium, it's how do I get my foot into the door? How do I achieve scale? So let's just take AJ as an example here. Is a South African company sitting at the bottom tip of Africa doing business in the Middle East, raising money from the US in a space of 45 minutes to an hour. Now, what that does not only shrinks the world, but it gives us an opportunity. So given the constraints that Nomonde had spoken about, there's the other side to it as well, right? Which we must acknowledge, is the world becomes smaller, your market size becomes bigger. But balance that with more competition now. So now you've got more competition, which means that your quality of delivery has to be there. If there's one thing we know, for many of us sitting in the South African landscape, sub-Saharan Africa, we talk a lot, Rich coming from a lecturer, but we talk a lot, but we don't deliver all the time. Now we're competing at a global stage. The gig economy still works. The gig economy works. So what do we need to get involved in the gig economy here? And I'm going to talk about not a small business, but an individual, right? And I think if we're going to talk about entrepreneurship, we must start individually, then start building up to becoming employing others. But if we start at that level of an individual, what tools do I need? I need access to a computer, a phone, and I need access to the internet. So those two basic ingredients, the time is there already. What he said, Aki and everyone here, is how do we use the internet? Government's given us free access, 25, 50 megs, whatever it may be. Well, the stats show us.
Porn.
What do we use it for? I'm not allowed to say that in a public space, right?
I can say it.
You can say
we can say it.
Yes.
So it's all the stuff. So you can go out and you can look. So I think what we've got to sit with here, I think when we talk about entrepreneurship, is number one, acknowledge we don't have a culture of risk-taking.
Absolutely.
That's got to start off basically here. Then our adoption, basically, from you and I sitting in this room here, you and I are not risk takers. I will only catch the Uber once someone has told me it is safe to catch. Can you see that? It's not sitting where we come from, let's call it Southeast Asia, where people are willing to try something new the moment it lands, right, Aki?
Right.
And so those become barriers that we often forget about. In my view, I think we focus too much on the Ubers and the platform economies and all of that nice stuff that exists out there without understanding those are endpoints and what leads us to those endpoints. We talk about Uber, we talk about Alibaba, we talk about all of those platform businesses, and we all know loss-making until when? Until they control the payment. The payment and the transaction, the person who controls the payment and transaction on the platform economy makes money. That's why the banks have to go that route, right? Now, to leverage that and get that scalability is not as easy. You're starting from ground zero where the technology doesn't exist collectively. You've got to pull the pieces together now. And so when we talk about it being a disruptor or an enabler, what we've got to understand is, do we have the ingredients to make it an enabler? I think for big business, definitely an enabler. Small to medium businesses, a disruptor to actually keep big business on their toes.
Clearly, we've got quite a few challenges, as you've all highlighted over here, and of course that gap is shifting. But you know, I am seeing some green shoots. Okay, you know, we need to look at the undersea cables and the investments that have been made. You know, Google, Facebook, each have invested over $1 billion. These cables have just landed in South Africa. You look at the investments that have been made in data centers, for example, across the continent. I look at a continent of 1.4 billion people, but we must all remember one thing that, and sometimes we kind of shield ourselves in this bubble here in South Africa, but we're actually part of the continent. And less than 50%, over 50% of the continent haven't experienced the internet. And then the next 3 to 4 years, we're expecting around 3 to 500 million people to access the internet for the first time. I mean, that is massive. It's like a third of the continent that is going to access the internet for the very first time in the next few years. So what are we doing as a country? What are we doing as businesses? What should we be doing to really foster a culture in small and medium-sized businesses? You touched on the employment. How many people have actually got student training programs that are taking people? You look at the skills shortage in the tech space in South Africa. You know, organizations cannot fill spaces in organizations, but yet we still talk about these small, medium-sized businesses because that's an integral part of unlocking this enabler in technology.
Okay, sorry, I just have to react to that because anyone sitting here, whether they did a tech undergraduate or anything, would tell you those skills are obsolete already.
Absolutely.
Right? So this is the positive side. The green shoot is that technology is moving so quickly, is that there's opportunity.
Yes.
There's opportunity. If everyone who's sitting here is not continually learning, you're done. The half-life of a skill is now down to 5 years. In other words, what you learned 5 years ago is almost obsolete right now. So that gives us all an opportunity, including these young individuals. We see, you know, there's coding programs, there's online courses, free, right? And so we're just not seeing people take that up. That's my biggest concern, is we are not grabbing the bull by the horns and saying, this seems to be the next big thing. I keep hearing about something called cloud. Like, what is it?
You spoke, you know, about this youthful population that is not being employed. And I think historically, tech is seen, or let's call it like your STEM subjects, is seen as I must study mathematics, I must do science, you know, in university in order to be able to get into a BSc. And like Manoj, you know, has alluded to, that's not necessarily true in this day and age. You don't need that. I think your ability, your analytical ability can help you code. Doesn't mean that you would have necessarily needed to study mathematics. You could have done history. But kids can actually get into coding programs and become devs, which is a skill that is required worldwide. It's not yet, I don't think any company is able to fill the development capability that's actually required. So we also need to, you know, change the narrative out there with regards to the fact that this sector is a scary thing that no one can actually come into. It's such an exciting sector, and I think it needs to start at school, where we teach kids how to code from school, so the interest is actually there even from primary school. But there's other issues, again, that we also need to appreciate in terms of our education system as well, which needs work. And all of us need to contribute. I don't even think that universities can write curriculums fast enough with regards to the exponential change that's happening in the technology sector. I think Singularity has tried, right, to try and anticipate skills of the future and how you then upskill people. But we don't have a Singularity in South Africa, or in Africa. Let's call it Africa, Aki, because you spoke about the continent, but that's really, from even an educational perspective, that's how we should be thinking, because we don't know the skills that we are going to require 2 years from now, 3 years from now. I don't even think, you know, we've even, on the cloud journey that we're talking about, AWS, so Amazon and Microsoft try in terms of creating programs to teach cloud skills, but universities have not necessarily caught up with that. That's how fast these things are changing. So they've seen a gap in the market, they capitalize on it, and then they try and upskill. But the trick to that is, am I your cloud provider? If I am your cloud provider, I will then give you licensing. It excludes many in that process, because then you're upskilling people who are already in the system. And then we lose out on young people who are not in the system. Another criticism that I'd like to give to ourselves, because it's always important to actually do internal work. When these young people land in our businesses, what do we do with them? They could have gone and done their free coding. They would have done this amazing stuff, gone through AJ's program that has taught them the importance of bringing your entrepreneurial thinking into opportunities, because you'll run. Now, here's this young person, ambitious, wants to learn, wants to add value, make a difference. You send them to make photocopies.
Or coffee. The days of cut and paste, I think, are over. Right? I think we have a unique set of challenges in this country. Right. we can't get the basics right. Electricity, I mean, you know, we were included in a Silicon Valley accelerator program last year. And the founders of this accelerator program said to us, you know, the thing that we have going for us is perseverance. That you can have 4 hours or 6 hours of load shedding in a day, and you can still create something which is world class, competitively priced, with all these barriers that if you're in the valley, they don't understand load shedding, right? It's a concept which is completely foreign. Europe, for the first time, will start to understand, come winter, what load shedding is, right? I want to see how VCs and startups in Europe react. Okay, so I think we have something which is built or baked into our DNA. Perseverance. I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for how much we persevere. So the first thing I think is a unique set of challenges. We need to hold government accountable. We all, every single one of us, need to hold government accountable. I'm sure most of you, like me, pay my taxes and so forth. We pay rates and taxes. And, you know, when I look at the potholes, and it's just all of these factors count against us when you're trying to get to a meeting or, you know, and you have a blown out tire because you hit a pothole, right? So all of these things, I think we have a collective responsibility around. The second thing I think is, when I touched on it, we have this handout mentality which needs to come to an end. When I look at the rest of the continent, there's a sense of opportunity abundance which we don't have. We look around us, we see the potholes, and then we expect, dial direct and discovery to create the opportunity to somebody to fill those potholes, right? Actually, there's opportunities wherever we look. We need to be more entrepreneurially inclined to take advantage of the opportunities that all the shortcomings that government and the private sector actually place in front of us, there are opportunities to address that. And then the last thing that I want to say is that, you know, I think corporates in this country have a moral obligation to give young startups opportunities. And so we need to create smart ecosystems where large corporates, small startups, you know, graphic designers, the gig economy guys, we create these smart ecosystems that allows us to leapfrog the rest of the world. Okay? Because if we don't do that, we forget in 10 years time we're going to be sitting here having the same discussions and the same debates. I think that as a small business, as a startup, what you need to do is stretch your rand as far as you possibly can. And you start off by leveraging social capital first, failing which, if you have to pay for something, you pay as little as possible for as much as you can get. And you milk that thing, right?
As far as you can.
As far as you can. Because again, that's, in my view, baked into our DNA,
Absolutely.
right? When you're in the townships and you're hungry, you stretch that loaf of bread for as much as you can get out of it, right? That bologna tastes better, you know, when you've had it 3 days in a row, okay? Right. So, believe me, we have these inherent traits that we don't leverage enough. And that's what I think we need to do, right? Use the freemium model, right? Use the tools, get the basics, but learn. The most important thing that we need to do is Google is your best friend as a startup.
You should sweat your assets. You shouldn't occupy space or buy space. Your address should be your office. But a lot of the time, we really want to keep up appearances because we assume it's going to attract money. Make money. rest will follow afterwards. And actually tap into your social capital. I absolutely agree with that. Like, call a friend. And I would encourage women to do this a lot. I'm a woman on this panel, I can't not talk about that. I want more women in technology, so I have to talk about this. There is an issue. So Askis, like, I'm
Yes, no, it's fine.
But like, also, even if you look at, even from a JSE point of view, how many women are sitting in JSE listed companies in this country, it's a problem. And it gets worse now when you enter into sectors which are predominantly meant for women. Now, female entrepreneurs in this country also need to leverage social capital, and we don't, because we just assume that I must show I'm excellent, and then after I show I'm excellent, everything will follow. It's not how it works.
Yeah.
So I encourage all of us to tap into systems of people that you know. Even if it's an email and someone you've met, remind me. Remember that day I met you, ever, this is what I'm looking for. All of us say that we want to employ, level 1 companies, because we get more points. And then you become a level 1 provider. And your highest points are your points with women-led businesses where ownership is with women. And I stand here not just as a black woman, I'm an advocate of all women, because there aren't enough of us in the world to actually be able to say that I stand just for black women. I don't. I say this on behalf of all women. We can't afford to compete. So if there are women who are in business, you need to pull a sister up with you and make sure that they win. And this is also to the men in the room who are advocates and allies. I encourage you to help our sisters as well and make sure that they win, because you're probably far ahead than somebody else who's just starting out. And there's knowledge that you can pass on to actually help those entrepreneurs win. Sometimes it's just teaching people how to hustle better and to tap into networks where ordinarily they would not, because they don't know people.
Small business very often does not think about aggregating their efforts in terms of trying to get venture capitalists interested in what they're trying to offer. What they try and do is they run this whole race by themselves. Now, if you have to have amalgamation of various businesses that are now going to pull together, similar industries, similar challenges, you're far more likely to get that attention that you're going to require, because unfortunately, we live in a society where you need to search for information. Yes, it's available, but you need to know what to look for. You need to know that there are associations out there and, that do support startups. Startups have become the buzzword of today. And something else that you need to be aware of as well is that as much as we can, say that certain things don't work in South Africa, government has actually been, a strong advocate for small businesses, backing them, making sure that, in terms of various startups, how do we facilitate that journey? And the thing is, I think we need to actually, shine the spotlight on those types of efforts so that we get onto that, specific track as well. Because the thing is, from a small business perspective, if you're not consistently staying at the forefront of whatever industry that, you are, you'll become just a shadow.
Yeah,
A lot
become
of it,
irrelevant.
Yes, and you need to actually, take the power of harnessing whatever is available and, try and get that attention spotlighted so that you can get investment into your business. Because I think a misconception with any small business is that you need to use your own capital. Not necessarily.
How does business mentor small businesses? Big business, big brother, big sister to small businesses. We don't need much more. You just need mentorship. And that was something the National Youth Development Agency tried many years ago, but it didn't work, right? It wasn't advertised, so people didn't know about it. But imagine you had a mentor. Just imagine that. I didn't have one. Imagine you had a mentor. Imagine every one of you had a mentor here. Someone who knew. When AJ says that he can attract Rick Orloff onto his board, who used to work for Apple and chief security officer, well, that's because he sees value in it, but Ajay's way of being able to say, it's how I craft value. It's how I'm going to use your deep skills. It's mentorship, guys.
What are your closing thoughts on, businesses and using technology as an enabler with small and medium-sized businesses? It sounds like there are lots of opportunities out there, but what are your takeouts? What are your thoughts as we close this evening? Let's start off with you, Prof.
If not you, then who? And I think we've got to take the individual responsibility. and break our mindsets open. Opportunity is out there in all shapes and forms. Just think about infinite scroll versus infinite ability to learn something that you can use. That's it.
How about yourself, AJ?
I think two things, right? The way we solve, or the way we created QR, the idea came about in the shower, right? I do my best thinking in the shower. All the things that I hate about shopping, how can I use technology to solve those things, right? Now, if you just think about everything that annoys you, from the potholes to traffic to whatever, every one of those things represents an opportunity of need, okay? And so identify the things that you don't like, because 9 out of 10 times everybody else says the same thing that they don't like. And then solve that problem, but do it, right? Don't dream it, do it.
Fantastic. And Nomonde?
The need for change in the technology space is never going to stop. The pace of it is actually going to go faster. So as this happens and you have access to those changes immediately, pull someone along with you who ordinarily would not have that access and choice. As you lift up, that other person lifts somebody up, and we, over time, hopefully will close the digital divide that is very prevalent on this continent.
Fantastic. Pragashni?
So I think closing for me, I'd have to say that technology can be actually likened to a signpost. No two people will ever interpret it the same way. It's never in the same language. And it's really going to be up to you on how you shape and use that to your own advantage.
Hi everybody, my name is Ryan Bacher. I'm the Managing Director and co-founder of NetFlorist. We've been in the e-commerce industry for 20 years. We were one of the first to begin, and I'll be doing a masterclass on e-commerce at GIBS coming up. It's a good time to be thinking about e-commerce. We've seen over the last few months, because of COVID, that South Africans are more likely to purchase online. They're more interested in looking online for stuff. And if you're a small business, an entrepreneur, a startup, a big business, and you've been thinking about taking your ideas online, now is a particularly good time to do so. The masterclass is basically going to be demystifying e-commerce. The goal, if you join it, is to help you understand the basics of e-commerce, which is website design, Google Analytics once you have your website up, or any analytics, understanding what your customers are doing on your website. We'll be touching on UX, so how to get customers to add something to basket and how to get them to check out successfully. We'll be looking at digital marketing, which is a terrifying thing for most people. Again, we'll be demystifying it, dumbing it down. So we'll be looking at Google and AdWords and search engine optimization, or SEO. Don't worry, these things are terrifying, but we'll make them simple and easy. Facebook marketing, email marketing. We'll be looking at things like payment, how to get things delivered in South Africa, and what you'll leave with is a broad-based understanding of e-commerce. It won't be so scary for you anymore. Hopefully you'll get excited about it and you'll take your ideas online. Hope to see you there.